Talking about one's stories is a little too much like nailing a dog to the floor. You can get it to stay put that way, but it doesn't do much for the dog. Hey everybody, thank you as always for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today is a very interesting episode because I officially have COVID. I thought that I just had a cold with some congestion and so on over the weekend on my way back from Las Vegas, but then at work yesterday I went to eat my orange and didn't taste anything. So I was tested and promptly sent home to quarantine for the rest of this week. So I'm pretty tired. My main symptoms are fatigue, and of course I can't smell or taste anything, so my morning coffee ritual has been sadly disappointing. But that's okay, because I don't need my sense of taste or smell to enjoy Brian Evenson. Today, I'm talking about my first experience of Brian Evenson. I've been wanting to read his stuff for years, and Eddie Kim of Paperback fame visited Greensboro last year, and he met up with me at a coffee shop and he gifted me this book, and I am forever grateful. This is Altmann's Tongue. It has stories and a novella called The Sansa Affair, and then this particular edition includes an introduction by philosophy professor Alfonso Lingus, an afterword by Brian Evenson, and his first O. Henry Award-winning story called Two Brothers. At this point, this has a little bit of age on it, and at this point in Evenson's career, I think he has something like 3 different O. Henry Awards. I would also like to bring attention to the UNSAID literary journal. This is currently the only issue, but a new issue is in the making. This one boasts 2 pieces from Gordon Lish right at the start. It also has pieces from Anne Carson, Brian Evenson, even Jason Schwartz is on here of John the Posthumous fame, along with plenty of others. Since this came out last year, I will take its bio about Evenson as more complete than the one in Altmann's Tongue. He is the recipient of indeed 3 O. Henry Prizes, a National Endowment of the Arts Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Award. He currently lives in Los Angeles and teaches in the Critical Studies program at Cal Arts. So definitely give the UNSAID a look. You can go onto the website that I'll put in the description, or you can go to Bison Books. They're selling copies of this through there. They're currently on sale. You're going to find contributors such as Gary L. Lutz, Brian Evenson, Anne Carson, Gordon Lish, and so many others. So go and give this a check. If I didn't know anything at all about the author of these pieces, I would be left to believe they are written by a surgeon who also happens to be a philosopher and a serial killer. There's a nonchalant viciousness and a vicious nonchalance. In fact, the more I read these stories, the more I was struck by a kinship with Maurice Blanchot, whom I discovered earlier this year and did a video. The concept of the neuter voice really comes into play here, although we stay usually in the perspective of the killer or killers. Evenson, in his afterword, he discusses the time that he spent studying Bataille and how he has worked hard to perfect this craft and this style. It's very unique. One way to describe these short pieces, and some of them fit onto a single page, they're like flash fiction or microfiction, very much like Diane Williams, although this deals almost exclusively with violence and death. In fact, most of the opening sentences give us death or violence in one way or another. But it's completely shorn of morals and emotion. Explanations, exposition in general is completely excised from these works. It's as if a camera is set up and left recording these scenes, and we're given a transcript of simply what the camera sees. There's a disinterestedness on part of these characters that will be totally foreign to you, the reader. And it's not as disorienting as much as it is terrifying. We're not given killers or serial killers in the way that we're used to with the glamour of Hollywood or with the psychoanalytic explanations that are readily available, such as some sort of sexual aberration or something like that. In fact, as Lingus says in his introduction, in particular here, killing is nowhere motivated by lust. Thanatos is utterly separated from Eros. This is why these stories seem not to belong to our psychoanalytic century, why they seem to come from medieval Japan or the land of the Mayas. The version of killing in this book will be resisted. We readily object to Evenson's isolating the act from any socio-political context, stripping away all psychoanalytical motivations. Partly, this effect is achieved by shearing away all the fat from his stories. And what results is more of a minimalist style. Yet there's a precision to the word selection and word order that keeps Evenson's work away from totally being comfortable within that niche of minimalist writers. And his writing is often excruciatingly beautiful, especially when it's at its most grotesque. By the back corner, where the dark paint had started taking air underneath and was flaking off the house now and falling apart at touch like burnt turkey skin. Flaking away like burnt turkey skin. It's almost sensory overload for the reader, but in the best way. I believe that Evenson, for his brand, his style, has mastered the opening line. Like I said, it not only goes ahead and asserts very boldly that this is going to be about violence and death, but it's extremely engaging and compelling for the reader to go on. For example, in Killing Cats, the first sentence is, "They wanted to kill their cats, but the problem was the problem of transportation." And right there, you'll see that there's that nonchalance and there's this tension caused by redirection. There's a disconnection between the mind of the killer and some kind of moral compass. And Evenson has mastered this diversion in his stories. A suicide note appears in one of these stories, and the attention is completely redirected away from the fact of a suicide note and thus a suicide that took place, and the reasons why our attention swings to the script in which it's written. Here's a great opening line. "That was the year my father was shot for giving bad directions." And in a story that has to be an homage to the story of the Eye by Georges Bataille, there is a story called Eye that opens with this. "He came close enough to her to see the webbed stresses on the surface of her eye, spreading out from the minute white pocks of crushed glass." If I were a journalist or someone given to sensationalism, I might have started this video or made the title of the video or the thumbnail proclaim something along the lines of "Stories of Death and Violence by an Excommunicated Mormon." In the afterword, Evenson shares how he was part of Brigham Young University, which is part of the Mormon institution. And in the course of his studies, one of his missions as a Mormon sent him to France. And there he was supposed to go and do what he calls the equivalent of a door-to-door salesman. And he just couldn't get into it. And he was spending that time instead, reading his Bataille. And he was eventually basically sent home on the Mormon equivalent of dishonorable discharge. But that sort of started for him this unease with his religious affiliation. When he published Altmann's Tongue, this sparked a scandal and ultimately led to his discharge from Brigham Young University. And what's more, it led to the dissolution of his marriage. And all of these fallouts, all of these scandals and these endings spring from the discord between the Mormonism he was born into and raised in and his vocation as a writer. He's no longer affiliated with the Mormon Church, and he is focusing on these amazing pieces of writing. Nonetheless, a scandal such as that, as you can imagine, has done well to peg him as a cult figure. And of course, the subject matter and the way in which he writes his subject matter is also prime for being a cult writer. But I'm really hoping that we can elevate him above that stigma, because what he's doing is very fresh. It may not be new, the idea of the neuter and this disinterestedness, but the way in which he is translating that into a craft is fresh, is new, is engaging. His short story in the copy of UNSAID that I showed earlier by itself shows that Evenson not only has a unique style, but he actually has a very sharp and expansive creative imagination. One of the recurring tropes in these Altmann's tongue stories is that of a character who is aware of a death, but has no compulsion, no impulsion to divulge that to anyone around them. It's very new, the way in which it's portrayed. It's not simply hiding something. One thing that I kept thinking as I was reading these is, how in the world does someone come up with some of this stuff? Well, also in the afterword, we get a glimpse into exactly where this came from. His days affiliated with Mormonism are put to good use, because there were times when he was in the hierarchy as a leader over a congregation or what have you, but these people would call him all hours of the night and early morning and need him to come and be with them immediately because of some crisis or another. And so he talks about how there were many times that he would be driving around in the middle of the night while this person beside him is opening up and confessing these insane things. And so he learned how to just simply listen, not confer judgment, not prod or redirect or anything like that, but just simply be an open channel. And that is exactly what happens here in these stories. Evenson, the writer of these stories, has become simply a fluid channel. And yes, crazy things happen. He talks about how he ended up with a gun pressed to his temple at one point, driving around like that. And so there is this very, very interesting connection here, even though nothing in the introduction by Lingus or the afterword or anything in the stories points to Maurice Blanchot. I can't help but think about Blanchot's near-death experience that he recounts in The Instant of My Death and the implications there. It seems to have spurred on a creativity similar to the creative effulgence we see here with Brian Evenson. At the end of all these short pieces, we get a novella called The Sansa Affair. And what's so interesting about this one is that we get the format of a whodunit or a detective fiction, where there's an investigator who was killed while investigating another killing. And so it's multi-layered investigations and killings that implicate even the investigators themselves. Now, what Evenson does here is he takes an epistemological approach, and he constructs this entire novella purely out of the observations, thoughts, and opinions of the characters around this investigation. He even usually parenthetically qualifies whose thought or whose idea or whose assertion this or that was. So for every single clue, for every single step of the way during all of this, what you get are these multi-stranded perspectives of it that often clash, showing the fragility of human epistemology and what we can constitute is knowledge or is truth and evidence. And it plays off of the well-known fact of how unreliable eyewitnesses really are, how faulty the qualifications or the fine-tunings of human memory is. So overall, I am extremely impressed with Brian Evenson. He is, to me, enigmatic, virtuosic, very unique, very compelling. I'm going to get my hands on everything he's written. After I had killed Altmann, I stood near Altmann's corpse, watching the steam of the mud rising around it, obscuring what had once been Altmann. Horst was whispering to me, "You must eat his tongue. If you eat his tongue, it will make you wise." Horst was whispering, "If you eat his tongue, it will make you speak the language of birds." I knocked Horst down and pointed the rifle, and then, as if by accident, squeezed the trigger. One moment I was listening to Horst's voice, his eyes brilliant, the language of birds, and the next I had killed him. I stared at the corpse next to Altmann's corpse. It had been right to kill Altmann, I thought. Given the choice to kill or not to kill Altmann, I had chosen the former and had, in fact, made the correct choice. We go through life at every moment making choices. There are people, Altmann among them, who, when you have sent a bullet through their skull, you know you have done the right thing. It is people like Altmann who make the rest of it worthwhile, I thought, while people like Horst, when killed, confuse life further. The world is populated by Altmanns and Horsts, the former of which one should riddle with bullets on the first possible occasion, the latter of which one should perhaps kill, perhaps not. Who can say? I felt remarkably calm. I prided myself that moment on my self-composure, taking a minute to sit down next to the two corpses, Altmann and Horst, and to feel the calm to its greatest extent. This calm, I suppose, was not the result of killing Horst, but, as one might expect, of killing Altmann. There are two types of people, I thought, type Horst and type Altmann. All people are either Horst or Altmann. I am the sole exception. I repeated the phrase, sole exception, alternating it with unique exception, trying to decide which was the better, unable to decide. I flew blackly about, smelling my foul feathers and flesh. I stuttered, spattered a path through the branches of trees, sprung fluttering into blank sky.